My name is Bourne. I'm chair of the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. And today I'm going to be talking about an energy ecosystem. Basically, how do the energy companies work? How do they link together? But most importantly, what is their attitude towards climate change? What should their response be? Why do they resist? Is it logical? Is it rational? And I will talk about how the system that they live within, a worldview if you like, is highly resistant to change. Where are the opportunities for them in the future? How do they go forward? And then look at 9 rational responses why those companies, why they behave the way they do. Now, if they should act, and if we do need to change towards a renewable energy world, which is where I obviously want us to do, we have to find a way in which companies can create hybrid models as they go forward. That's going to be very, very difficult. There's a tendency for companies, as they hybridize, to spit the margin out because it's not at the core. So we'll look at how, why, if, and when companies should act. I'm going to talk about, big business, but I'm going to talk about really big business. And the reason I'm doing so, partially it's my own background, sort of big oil, big energy, and partially because big business has an inordinate effect on how governments work and throughout the whole of the supply chain as well. And I will talk about an energy ecosystem in a few minutes. It really has a strong, strong effect on what's going on as we go forward. I'm going to bring in some, obviously, business analogues, but I'm going to bring in some ecological analogues and biological analogues, and I hope you find them interesting and not too confusing. So the first thing is, with businesses, particularly big businesses, and by that also I mean they're looking at a time frame of sort of 50-year, 100 years into the future. So big mining companies are looking 100 years into the future. They have the capability and the analysis to think through a lot of the socio-logical, the political systems, what's actually going to happen. And they scan the horizon, and obviously there's a lot of uncertainty out there, but they look at trends. They're looking at all sorts of trends that are going on. Quite naturally, they pick up reinforcing events which reinforce their own worldviews, and they may well ignore detracting events, but they're watching the events. And perhaps most importantly, they're also watching for discontinuities or trying to cause discontinuity. So the classic risk to business, I believe, is the discontinuity caused by government when they finally make up their minds and act. At the stroke of a pen, a new law comes in, change happens. But another sort of discontinuity could be when a firm decides to take over someone else or introduce something new to the market deliberately to cause a disruption. As firms have been looking at the future and looking at climate change, and again, the big firms, all of the big firms have been looking at climate change for at least 20 years. The oil companies, because it was a strategic issue, do you exist or do you not exist? For many other firms, it's just, is there a risk that I need to watch at the board level, or is it something I need to be thinking about because there could be an opportunity out there? But at least 20 years people have been looking at it. And all the while, public concern has been moving. The graph is broadly the Australian data of concern on climate change. And it builds, but it waxes and it wanes. There's lots of different events that come through there. There's also background noise of, what's the economy doing? As you come up to Copenhagen, which is the peak, suddenly the global financial crisis has hit, just sort of like a year before. People's minds are changing. People in business are changing, people in the society are changing. Have I got a job tomorrow? What matters to me? The climate skeptics are on the rise, and you see this amazing drop in concern, which I think is actually turning around now, although the data doesn't actually show it very much at this particular stage. So things are moving. But interestingly enough, the propensity to act by governments sort of follows that line, but lags, because governments very, very, very seldom lead. They almost need the consensus to have been built there in the public domain, or they will not act. Many a politician has said to me, when you can show me the data in this particular marginal seat, then I'll act. Otherwise, they don't. So the propensity to act sort of waxed and waned and sort of disappeared, and maybe it will turn, and within Australia, who knows what will happen on September the 14th. So why, how, and if should business act at all? What does business look like? This is where I'm going to talk about an ecosystem, and I want to differentiate this from social ecological systems that people talk about, and think of just a pure industrial ecosystem, and then look at the different scales. So you've got the world scale there of, that's just a world oil trade flows graph. Bring it back down to Australia, bring it back down to Sydney, you know, your local area network of electricity providers. Multiple scales throughout the world. The energy world is vast. It covers the whole world. And many actors, huge numbers of actors in this world. I see it as, you know, connection and connectivity and breadth are enormous. That's what happens in ecosystems. But I also see predators and prey. I see bottom feeders and nutrient recyclers. I can see passive and aggressive actors. I can see extinction candidates, new colonizers, new forms, and amazingly networked, absolutely amazingly networked. It's truly a rich tapestry of a modern industrial ecosystem. And you're trying to change that? This is very, 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 very difficult. So why do I use the ecosystem as a metaphor? Partially is to, you know, show you how incredibly complex the system is. And secondly, to bring in the concepts of resilience, certainly as I think about them, and a concept of incumbency, which again is something where I think about these things. So in the climate debate, there's a lot of discussion going on with regard to resilience. Many people care about resilience, and it's more often than not talked about the resilience of our coastal cities, the resilience of our agricultural areas. It might be talking about the resilience of a system. It might be talking about the resilience of an individual. But the particular reason I want to talk about resilience is with regard to this definition, where it's, you know, talking about the capacity of a state to absorb shocks and broadly maintain its state and function. And the topographical map is basically saying, look, if you're in a stable state, you know, it's deep, it's wide, there's not that much chance of change. However, maybe a new state is possibly out there. And people talk about resistance, they talk about the latitude, and they talk about the precariousness. Is something likely to flip into another state? And in the world I'm in at the moment with the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, in a sense what we're trying to do is actually flip the state from a fossil fuel state to a renewable energy state. And how hard is that going to be to do with an ecosystem? Interestingly enough, most people who talk about resilience in ecosystems, and particularly in the environmental movement, tend to be caring about what is and what was, and they would like to freeze frame it. Completely freeze frame it. We would like it as it is now, as Dad knew it, as Granddad knew it. And yet we are actually in a complex adaptive system, whether it be an ecosystem you're thinking about, or whether it be the industrial ecosystem, or whether it be society. Freeze framing is pretty much impossible to do. So resilience is seen as a positive attribute if you want to stay in the state you are. But it's actually quite a negative attribute if you want to change. So I've sort of played around with this other term, the flip side of the coin, which is incumbency, and that is the ability to resist change, to actively resist change. Interesting enough, in ecological systems and resilience, you can think about things, yeah, they change. And they change over 100,000 years. They change over 1 million years, some of these ecosystems. And they do change at the DNA level as well. So things do actually happen, but it's by and large mostly passive. But if you talk about an industrial ecosystem, then the incumbency part of it, the resistance, is active. It is absolutely and strongly active. I want to now talk about another concept, and that is the immune response. And again, I'm doing so to sort of bring this into the world of business and what it actually feels like as we go forward. So immune response, you know, sort of how does the body reject this problem that's coming into its bloodstream or whatever else. But actually, if you have a look at a slightly different definition, the reaction of managers and business units in the corporate body to the presence of an innovative business unit that is not recognized as part of the process, you know, not part of the body corporate. And some of you will have worked in firms where a new business unit has been created. Interestingly enough, in the world of BP, where I came from, for more than 30 years, we had been looking at renewable energy, and at one stage, we were probably the leading solar photovoltaic company in the world, but that did change. And so I'm bringing in just sort of 6 words here: promote, protect, partition, isolate, reject, and eject. Show the sequence of what often happens in big firms. So at first, the new idea comes in, sort of brilliant, brave new world. We BP will change into a renewable energy company. People are welcoming it. It's great. It feels really good to the heart. Then, interestingly enough, the business unit is protected from very often some of the capital-seeking process you have to do internally. You're fighting for capital. Can I have it for my refinery? Can I have it for my gas field? Or can I have it for this solar business? The next thing that tends to happen is you get a protection and partitioning system where maybe this new business unit doesn't actually have to abide by the normal internal laws of the bureaucracies that go on, because it's just too difficult and we don't want to smother this new being as it comes forward. The beginning of isolation actually occurs. Eventually you get to the point where usually what happens is either the chief executive officer walks or is walked. The market changes, more dividend is required. A global financial crisis is coming on. And before you know it, the eject button is pressed. The organization is spun off, usually for a loss, and the body, corporate, learns it has become resilient. It is absolutely determined it won't do that again. Well, maybe it will, but it'll do it differently. The interesting thing to me is change is incredibly difficult. To turn an oil company into an energy company, and they are very different. To turn an oil company into an energy company is difficult. To turn it into a renewable energy company is very, 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 very difficult. Because what was at the margin, you're asking what was at the margin to grow and take over the core. And the internal resistance to that is absolutely phenomenal. And it's visceral, really, truly visceral. So the rejection process works, the immune response works extremely well. So as we go forward and try to move towards a renewable energy world, it is like deliberately courting a change of state. Fossil fuels dominate at this stage. Renewable energy colonizes, and I use that word deliberately. It colonizes. At first it's not noticed, but maybe it's just a bit of an irritant around the place. Eventually what you would expect to happen is renewable energy gains ground, fossil fuel loses ground. How do they feel? Not particularly happy. And eventually probably 2 states will be there, absolutely 2 states, a fossil fuel state and a renewable energy state, not just one. It may be that we'll move to one, but that's a bit too early to predict. If you actually look at where we are right now, 1.5%, 1.58% of the world's primary energy supply in 2011 came from renewable energy, and that's excluding hydro. Not much, but I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Where does it go? And it's not just one pathway, there are multiple pathways. There are multiple stable states for a time out there. We are evolving. It's a complex adaptive system. So let's come on to change. Why is change so difficult? So for me, there's multiple models of change, but I have 5 steps that I put in there. The invent, road testing, networking for adoption, which is not often talked about, building critical mass, and then fully adopted. The invent part is quite interesting because you invent it. This is the eureka moment. So great, I've got it. I'm going to clean up the world, make a lot of money, and all that sort of stuff. But the road testing is key. Did I invent something, or was I actually in the wrong bath? It wasn't a eureka moment at all. I was just in the wrong bath. But the next step, networking for adoption, to me becomes absolutely critical. You cannot move forward without getting ideas to be accepted. So at the very moment of invention, at the beginning of road testing, is the maximum propensity to piss everyone off. Now, I don't write that on the slide, but that's what it feels like. You've just pissed everyone off. You've come in with this new idea which is going to sweep away the world. I'm going to resist. I'm absolutely going to resist. Eventually, there is a point in time when everyone wants to catch up, and in fact, they probably were there when it was invented. That's how it goes. But they want to catch up. And if you actually look at sort of Victor Hugo's quote, one can resist the invasion of armies, one cannot resist the invasion of ideas, I do think he's right in the long run. But at the beginning, resistance is fierce, absolutely fierce. You're sort of turning over, if you like, the worldview of the energy ecosystem as is, and you're trying to create a new worldview. And it is truly as bad as that. So back to the energy ecosystem, how far have we come? Less than 2% of the way in 20 years. So it's that much on the curve. Not fall over backwards. So that much on the curve. It is exponential, but if you try to extrapolate from 2 points at 20 years at this bottom end, you could be that wide, but about 100 years, sort of thing. And how do you move it on? How do you accelerate it? That's, again, one of the things that our role in the Australian Renewable Energy Agency is how do we accelerate this? How do we bring about the change? And are we near a threshold? I don't think we're anywhere near a threshold at this stage. Are we accelerating? Yes, we are. Is there precariousness for fossil fuel companies? Certainly for some, but not for most. So what have businesses been doing in the face of this as they go forward? What are their rational responses over these last sort of 20 years, and certainly over the last 10 years or so? And I'll actually bring up this model completely. Okay, so on the vertical axis, I have looked at firms which are potentially disadvantaged, strongly disadvantaged by change from one world state to another world state in the energy ecosystem, neutral through to advantage. And then along the horizontal axis, I look at, is it like to have weak action from the sort of the government forces, or neutral, or is it strong? So in a sense, weak action is the typically two opposition parties can't quite agree, there's a lot of rubbish going on, there's a lot of mudslinging, and a company can say, look, they're not going to make up their mind. I'm not worried about them making up their mind and acting right now at the stroke of a pen. At the other end of the spectrum, there's strong action. Consensus has finally arrived. You can see that the two parties are going to land on this bill. It's going to go through both houses. It's going to be signed into law. Boy, oh boy, we had better do something. Actually enough, the very bottom left-hand curve, and which you might not be able to read from over this side, is basically grasp at alternative theories and seed doubt. It's the best thing you can do, just seed doubt. And Naomi Oreskes has written the great book about it. That's what you do. You just seed doubt. And that's the best strategic action you can possibly do. I can actually plot different firms into this. I can put about 100 different firms into the 9 spots and see where they are. If you go up the left-hand axis, at the very top, you're actively lobbying for change and you're seeking subsidies. And in the bottom right-hand corner, where there's potentially strong action but you're disadvantaged, you're actively lobbying against change, and you're seeking compensation. And interestingly enough, seeking compensation, seeking subsidies shouldn't be seen as pejoratives. It's just the way it is. If you want change to happen in our modern economies and our modern societies, the wheels are greased by subsidies and compensation as you move forward. It is just an absolutely rational response. Where most firms sit, however, is they sit on the fence, espouse change, and actually take no action. They might scan the horizon, but they take no action. And interestingly enough, when you talk to the CEOs, the chairs, the boards within these organizations, what I find fascinating is what their worldviews are like. Andy was talking about it a little bit last night, but the worldviews of the individuals are very interesting. Some ideologically one position, some ideologically the other position. Most people sit somewhere in the middle, but they vacillate. If the latest skeptic information comes out, they're more likely to lean slightly in that direction. If a more confirming issue with regard to climate change comes out, they'll slightly lean that way. But they'll sit on the fence. They are waiting for leadership. They're waiting for very, very clear leadership. And when governments finally get their act together, yep, we'll move then. In the meantime, we'll divest of dogs, invest in some outliers. In some cases, we won't take too big a step out. The little firms that are out there beginning to grow their new businesses will grow, and they'll do whatever happens. So what happens now? What's the pathway forward in the energy ecosystem. So I've done a sort of if-then. So if incumbency is the capacity to resist at multiple levels in order to retain its basic form and function. In this particular case, it's the basic form and function that you want. You want electricity flowing all the time. You want petrol and diesel to come to your cars all the time. You want to fly. You want that. You're the consumer. So if you're trying to protect that, and then if you then take, how does a firm change if there is a possible future state? And then you take the incumbency effect. If those people are likely to resist and most likely to say, we'll wait, what do you do then? Well, then to me, the pathway forward is not just through the invention of, there's no silver bullets, by the way, but the invention of new ideas and then hard grafting them through into the market. It's not just through that. It's actually beginning, even though it's very difficult to do, trying to create hybrid entities and hybrid possibilities out there. So where the fossil fuel actually does find, a fossil fuel company or energy company or electricity generating company can actually bolt on some renewable energy and try it out. So it's at 90% fossil fuel, 10% renewable energy. If that works for that company, maybe they'll put another 5% in, and so on. And slowly but surely, by learning, you find that you can make a profit into the future. Because if there's no possibility for you in the future, you're going to just keep resisting. So you have to find ways to show possibilities. So catalyzing such pathways can be thought of as providing the activation energy to overcome resistance. I'm a chemist by background, so I use activation energy. So, you provide that activation energy, that could be called cash, subsidies, compensation. Enrolling as many players as possible to bring up the understanding of what's actually happening and what's going on. And changing the feeling of precariousness for so many of the companies into one of opportunity, showing them where those opportunities might lie, and then helping them come into that area. So thank you very much.